The Leaders' Voice of Global South Summit 2023 envisages bringing together countries of the Global South and sharing their perspectives and priorities on a common platform across a whole range of issues. All the countries congratulated India on the G20 presidency and expected positive outcomes. The ministers mentioned that the problem of climate change is common for all countries, whether developed or developing, but the solution is not easy for the developing states, as they lack the technological and financial support. They highlighted the role of South-South cooperation in tackling the challenges of climate change. Dr. Sharma, you have led India's foreign policy as a former diplomat. If you can tell us what exactly is this Global South Summit?
Well, this is the pre-G20 high-level consultations among the countries of the South initiated by our Prime Minister to get the voice of the Global South, which can be then transmitted in a very coherent way to the G20 summit. As the Prime Minister said in his concluding remarks, that we distill action points for Global South, both what we should do together and what we seek from the international community. So this, I think, is the purpose of the summit. And Prime Minister's statement inaugurating the summit lays down many very important points, each of which resonate with India's deep-seated concern about what we say about the one world and about the family, world as a family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, as they say in Sanskrit. So, and in that context, how the countries of the South, the developing world, the three quarters of humanity, how they see the whole situation today. I think Prime Minister's opening remarks say that the world is in crisis and it's not clear how long it will last. So the point is that we who are facing this crisis should have our voices heard. And that is the point he emphasized, that the 8-decade-old model of global governance, the Global South does not have an adequate voice, and it should shape the emerging order. I think this shows the emphasis. And there's another point which PM made again in the concluding remarks, that we need to escape the cycle of dependency on systems and circumstances which are not of our making. This is very relevant in the context of the crisis, the climate change, as Prime Minister again very concisely put it, the natural climate and the geopolitical climate, the problems of that, which covers all the dimensions from pandemic to terrorism to conflicts and wars, which have all had an impact on the well-being and prosperity of our people. So the need to get together and exchange views and get ideas, this seems to be the purpose of the summit, and PM thanks everyone for their views.
The summit strengthened India's credential as a representative of the Global South. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has repeatedly emphasized the fallout of the Ukraine crisis on Global South in terms of the increase in food and fuel prices. The summit, which has a theme of unity of voice, unity of purpose. You think this is a kind of a new group which has come up to take up their cause, their voice in the international fora, and India is going to lead this group?
I would not go so far as to think about a formative process in terms of a group or a structure. Point is that this is very important as a consultative process at the very high level, at the level of a summit, just before the G20. And the G20 is going to take place, the summit is going to take place in India at a very critical juncture in the evolution of international geopolitics and the geoeconomics. And all of these have an impact on the fate of developing countries. So there's a need to get them on board, get their views, get the coherence in their concerns, because as the statements indicated, they have common concerns. So get them together and then, telescope them into the process of the G20 consultations, which are also separately progressing under the meetings of the Sherpas and the Sioux Sherpas. So this summit is a very forward-looking initiative, and it has come from the top in India. And if you look at the statements, like for instance, we, the Global South, have the largest stakes in the future. We should also have an equivalent voice. Then, and the mantra which PM has given of respond, recognize, respect, and reform. And what does it say? It says to re-energize the world, we should together call for a global agenda of respond, recognize, respect, and reform. And what is respond? Respond to the priorities of the Global South by framing an inclusive and balanced international agenda. Recognize that the principle of common and differentiated responsibilities applies to all global challenges. Now, common but differentiated responsibilities is the core for our approach to climate change discussions in the summits. But Prime Minister says that these apply to even, say, debt crisis, even a pandemic, all the global crises which have come to fore over the last 2 years. They all bear this, have a bearing on this common but differentiated responsibility. The third point is respect sovereignty of all nations, equality, rule of law, and peaceful solution or resolution of disputes and conflicts. And then lastly, reform of international institutions, including the United Nations, to make them more relevant. Now, these are again in sutra form, in concise form, conveying the concerns of the developing world.
Dr. Sharma, 2023 is very different, and the world feels very different in this year. From climate negotiations to sports to diplomacy, the global South is becoming more and more powerful. And we see the global politics trend is not what is getting enough attention. The global South is becoming more and more visible and influential in every area, from climate change, the big climate summit, which has been remembered for a breakthrough agreement of a loss and damage that was also possible because of global South. So Prime Minister Modi talks about a global South must create a new world order. So what does he mean by a new world order? You're talking about UN, you're talking about other institutions. What exactly does Prime Minister is talking about?
Well, this again, he said together, we must attempt to redesign global political and financial governance. This can remove inequalities, enlarge opportunities, support growth, and spread progress and prosperity. So this is the purpose of how we shape the emerging global order. And the need of the hour is to identify simple, scalable, and sustainable solutions that can transform our societies and economies, whether it is poverty, universal health care, or building human capacities. In all these areas, we have to overcome difficult challenges. And then he goes back to the last century, that in the last century, we supported each other in our fight against foreign rule. We can do it again in this century to create a new world order that will ensure the welfare of our citizens. And as far as India is concerned, your voice, that is the voice of the Global South, is India's voice. And the priorities of Global South are India's priorities. Now, you might say that this is all very well, but what about the tangible things? So about the tangible things, again, we have repeated that our development partnership over all geographies and diverse sectors have continued. We supplied medicines and vaccines to over 100 countries during the pandemic. India has always stood for a greater role for developing countries in determining our common future. And one earth, one family, one future. This is the mantra.
Absolutely, Dr. Sharma. Thank you very much for your time.